Imagine scrolling through your morning like a notification feed, coffee, commute, a message from a friend, and then suddenly the world glitches. A corner of the sky pixelates, a passerby rewinds a few steps, and a memory you never had flickers like an ad you didn't click. At first you think you're tired, or that you've finally binged one sci-fi too many. Then a note appears on the back of your hand, not in ink but a soft, glowing subtitle addressed to someone else. Background status, active. That single line rewrites everything. What if your life, with its small tragedies and tiny triumphs, was never the main event but a meticulously rendered backdrop built to support the narrative of a more important person? Imagine the directorial zoom pulling back to reveal you not as protagonist but as stage dressing. Your laughter timed to cue another's punchline, your grief harmonizing with the swell of someone else's victory, your commute scripted to provide a believable cityscape for a life that truly matters somewhere else. At first the realization is absurd and enraging. Then it becomes unbearably intimate, like overhearing the director of your existence whispering stage directions between takes. Scientifically minded thinkers would have a field day. Cognitive scientists might hypothesize that what you experienced as free will was in fact carefully orchestrated stochastic processes, algorithms running thousand-layered choices to create the illusion of spontaneity. Philosophers would dust off old debates. Is there any moral difference if your suffering was background for a higher story? Neuroscientists could start mapping patterns. Microlapses in attention coinciding with external edits, spikes of déjà vu where code re-renders a scene. Engineers would argue over whether the simulation runs on a nested machine, an elegant fractal stack where your you is a rendered environment inside someone else's mainframe. Privacy activists would have new banners. Our lives are not set dressing. But the emotional fallout would be the real experiment. Imagine telling a friend that your heartbreak was never the primary plot point and watching their face shift. Compassion, skepticism, pity. Some people would rage and demand agency, staging protests outside servers if servers had addresses. Others would seek comfort in the possibility that their small pains served a noble purpose, thinking, maybe my silence allowed another's voice to soar. Intimacy would become complicated. How do you love someone when you suspect your affections were written to make them appear more nuanced to a protagonist elsewhere? People would either spiral into nihilism, if I'm background, why try? Or ascend to a strange altruistic pride, to be the elegant blur that makes someone else's moment breathtaking. Weddings and eulogies would feel different. Vows might include clauses like, I promise to be more than background for you. And eulogists would have to decide whether to celebrate a life on its own terms or its service to the grander narrative. Economically and politically the effects would ripple. If entire neighborhoods discover their tailored sceneries, property values could crash or skyrocket depending on their perceived usefulness to the main story. Governments would scramble to regulate simulation ethics. Would there be rights for rendered beings? Courts would wrestle with responsibility. Who is liable when a background entity suffers? Insurance companies would invent policies against narrative exploitation, while tech firms sell background status certificates, guaranteeing minimal dignity for simulated lives. The job market would mutate. Some people might volunteer to be background specialists, trained to craft convincing pain and joy to enhance the protagonist's arc. Others would be ostracized as non-essential extras. Religious institutions would either reframe doctrines, perhaps the divine is a protagonist, or double down on the sanctity of every consciousness, background or not. On a cultural level, art and storytelling would taste different. Filmmakers would suddenly have symphonies of meta-lives to mine. The extra who stands at the cafe thinking their entire existence is an ad-lib becomes a character of tragic depth. Novels would explore layered subjectivities. First-person omniscient narrators would feel quaint next to lives aware of their background status. Empathy might either swell or wither. Some people become ruthless editors, trimming background lives for narrative economy. Others become guardians, lobbying to make every background scene a humane one. Imagine museums dedicated to the lives of those who made others great. Sanctuaries where the unnoticed are celebrated with plaques that read, "Here lived the hand that held the hero's coat." And then there's the social choreography. Friendships, rivalries, and power would rearrange. People might instinctively guard their most authentic selves, terrified that vulnerability will be harvested and repurposed to bolster someone else's reputation. Conspiracy theorists would multiply, claiming certain demographics are disproportionately used as backgrounds for specific protagonists, an accusation loaded with combustible social consequences. Countercultures would blossom, groups dedicated to refusing the simulation's scripts, living in deliberate mundanity as a form of resistance. If we are background, we'll be background unedited. Alternatively, a market for protagonist therapy would emerge. Sessions aimed at reclaiming narrative agency, at teaching people how to walk like protagonists even when the camera lingers elsewhere. Finally, picture the cosmic quiet question that keeps you awake. What does meaning look like when your life's major role is to frame another? Maybe meaning refuses to be revoked by ontology. You might discover that your small acts, making perfect coffee, smiling at a weary commuter, tying a child's shoe, are not hollow just because they were coded as atmosphere. They might be the subtle brushstrokes that, when placed correctly, lift a moment from ordinary to transcendent. Or perhaps the deepest horror is realizing that your greatest joys were engineered, that your happiest memory is a carefully placed prop. Either way, knowing your life is a background simulation forces a new honesty about how we value stories, how we prioritize suffering and triumph, and how easily we can overlook those who only ever seem to belong to the margins. In the end, whether you rage, resign, or reframe, the truth is a mirror held up to our hunger for importance. And if your life is indeed background for someone else's headline, maybe the real revolution is remembering that every backdrop is also, in its own stubborn way, a world, textured, alive, and utterly, impossibly human.